Let's go to Melbourne straight off the top. I mentioned before, it's a big story. It's a serious story involving one of its players and a result that has become public today. Tell us what you know.
Okay, so this was Mark Robinson's bombshell story in the Herald Sun. That's important to note, and it was released this morning. So if you've missed the broad details, it's Melbourne's Joel Smith who tested positive for a banned substance, which Robbo reports was cocaine, after the club's round 23 game against your Hawks, Whitey. Now, Smith was told about the positive test by Sports Integrity Australia. Remember that name, Sports Integrity Australia. He was told last week, and then the AFL was made aware of that shortly after. Now, he's been provisionally suspended, effective immediately, and there's some details to understand around this if we dig a little bit deeper. So, drug testing in the AFL focuses on recreational drug use. However, a player testing positive on match day triggers a violation of the league's anti-doping code, which it wouldn't do midweek. In other words, if any player tested positive for recreational drugs on a Wednesday, it would be a strike. On a Saturday or a Sunday or on game day, it is a strike, but it also triggers this the league's anti-doping code. This scenario is interesting because what happens now is different to what would have happened in 2019 or 2018. So as of the start of 2021, if Smith can prove the substance he took was used out of competition and was unrelated to sporting performance, the sanction can be as little as 3 months. But he has to be able to prove that. And he has to be able to prove that the substance that he took, in this case, reportedly cocaine, was taken before 11:59 p.m. of the day before the game. So he could say that I took this on a Tuesday and the game was on a Saturday or a Sunday, for example. And there's one extra element here. If he completes a substance abuse treatment program that's approved by the AFL, it can be as little as 1 month. So he could miss 4 weeks for this. Now, Melbourne, the AFL and the AFLPA have all released statements today as well. You can read them on sen.com.au. But the most important thing to note is the rules that were around 3 or 4 years ago have changed now. So if he accepts responsibility, it's an if. I don't know what he's thinking. I haven't spoken to him. I haven't been able to reach his manager. I haven't even spoken to the club. I've just read the statement. But if he accepts responsibility, there doesn't need to be a B sample. He could miss as little as 4 weeks, and he would get a strike for that as well. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but it needs a little bit of explaining. So you say 6 weeks suspension.
4 weeks.
4 weeks from now.
Yep.
But does that, they're away from the club.
Yep.
So does that mean that the suspension doesn't start until round 1 next year? Does it not start until they come back to training? Because this is what I'd like to know is, well, okay, if you're getting suspended in the off season, it actually doesn't count for anything.
No, that's a really good point, and that's something I haven't been able to confirm with the AFL yet. But he only would get, there's a few ifs and buts here, but if he has taken a banned substance on game day that's recreational, that can be up to 4 years. So there's a big gap here. But what this is essentially what the change in legislation is trying to put forward as of the start of 2021 is that recreational drug use 5 or 6 or 7 days before a game isn't intended to be performance enhancing. So they're trying to allow for that in a sense, for lack of a better term, by making it more of an educational and a medical approach rather than a harsh punishment of 18 months or 2 or 4 years. But I don't know whether he'd miss 4 games or just 4 weeks or 4 weeks when he comes back to training. All I know at the moment is he's provisionally suspended. So he's not allowed to go into the club even if he wanted to. And some players do go into the club at this time of the year.
They do.
Yeah.
So when you heard this news, what was your initial thought?
Well, I was surprised at the timing. That might sound a bit ignorant. There'd be some people that are surprised that AFL players taking banned substances at all. I'm not surprised by that, but I am surprised at the timing on the eve of finals. I read Mark Robinson's story, which was initially that a Melbourne-based player had tested positive, and then that was updated to the player being Joel Smith. And then my mind immediately went to, okay, what are the ramifications of this? And that's what made me do a bit more research. I spoke to the AFL. I should have asked the question that you asked just then, but I asked other questions about where they go from here. And it's a really delicate one But there's not the approach, if he indeed has taken this substance in a recreational capacity outside of game day, he's able to prove that, and he's willing to complete these courses that the AFL has set in train. It's a far less heavy-handed penalty than it would have been a few years ago.
So I'm 46 years of age. How old are you?
32.
32. So there's a 14-year age gap. My wife says I'm a very old 46.
I disagree with that.
So you just said then you weren't surprised that a player has been caught taking recreational drugs.
Yeah.
I am. And not probably that's a naive comment in a way. As I said, I'm a lot older and I'm a very conservative person by nature in a lot of ways. But the thing that surprises me is that the timing of it, it's close to the end of the home and away season, nearly the final series. Joel Smith is trying to be in that finals team. They desperately need tall players to stand up for them in a final series. And whether he's doing it within 24 hours of game day or close to it, what the hell is he doing so close to a game, so close to a final series? How does that even come into someone's mind that that's the right thing to do?
But yes, I agree with you completely. But isn't this just a reflection of society where people take recreational drugs 2, 3, 4, 5 days before work? Why is professional sport any different?
Because you're not allowed to, firstly.
But you're not allowed to at work either. If you're a lawyer or a school teacher or a tradie or any other job, then albeit you're not on the public stage, the optics aren't the same, but you're still compromising your health before
Yes, absolutely. But 100%. As I said, I've got to be very careful with what I say because of my stance on these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But for me, it's more, you are an AFL footballer being paid a lot of money, and the ramifications of you being caught taking drugs means you might not be able to play the game for 4 years.
Yeah.
If a lawyer, a plumber, whoever it is, takes recreational drugs during the week, might it affect their performance in what they do? Potentially, probably not. But they don't have the same levels of accountability that a professional athlete does.
Yeah.
That Joel Smith potentially loses his career and loses the ability to earn a lot of money by doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. The optics, there's one level, which is the optics. The other level is that there are young men and women playing AFL and AFLW who make the same mistakes as young men and young women in society.
Yeah, but the difference is, Tom, that the AFL players get significantly more education than what a normal person does.
Yeah, they are held to a high level of standard.
Significantly more education and are told of the ramifications if you do this sort of thing. Yeah. And it seems that there are AFL players that have, they feel that they're above the law and above these rules. Oh, I won't get caught. Or if I get caught, I might get a strike. That's okay. Work the percentages. I'm fully aware that there are a lot out there that do this sort of thing.
What percentage do you reckon do? What percentage?
No, I don't. I wouldn't know the answer to that. You'd know a lot more than I would. What would you say?
Well, I don't know how many. I've got no idea, but I would be surprised if, I don't know, 1 in 3 AFL players wouldn't have done drugs in the last 12 months.
You see, that's...
But I don't know. That's my guess.
I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got young kids growing up, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, if that's the case, I'm
maybe 1 in 4, maybe 25%.
Cold sweats, thinking about that sort of thing. Because last I checked, that sort of thing is illegal, and that sort of thing is actually really bad for you.
Mm. But people smoke, which is bad for you. People drink excessively, which is not illegal, but it's bad for you. Mm. So people make decisions for themselves all the time, but which compromises their health.
100%. That's exactly right. But the difference here in this situation is, as I said, apart from the fact it's illegal, that these guys are on huge money.
Yeah.
And not only does that sort of thing affect Joel Smith, but that sort of thing affects his teammates as well in his club.
It's also, I mean, we can get into the nitty-gritty of it, but just because one player allegedly does one thing, it doesn't mean the entire culture is bad and ruined. But if there's a pattern of bad behaviour and instances of players and coaches and whoever else at the club performing in a way which doesn't befit an AFL environment, then you have to start questioning the culture.
So do you think Melbourne's got a culture problem?
I think I would have said no, but I think yes. I think yes now. Yep.
So what needs to happen?
I don't know what needs to happen. Like what can you do? Because I'm not in a position where I'm knowledgeable enough to blame any given person. A culture is a collective thing. I also think it's I think it can be recovered. I mean, they finished top 4 2 years in a row. They won a flag. Top 4 in the home and away season. They won a flag in 2021. But culture is such a broad term. So I've spoken to a few people today, and they will say Melbourne definitely has a culture problem. And then other people say, no, there's no culture problem. There's just one or two things that are out of place, and they put it back together, and it will be okay. So to say categorically the culture is terrible, I think is a bit simplistic at this point, but I certainly think that it should be better. Certainly think that culturally, that football club, Melbourne, based on a number of different things, if you go back, and none of these instances are by themselves or in isolation symptomatic of a bad culture, but you put them together and it probably is. So Steve May and Jake Melksham getting into a fight, that doesn't happen at a club with a strong culture, I don't think. The never-ending court case against former President Glenn Bartlett, that should be wrapped up in some way, shape or form. That's hurting the club.
And just on that, what it is also doing though is it's bringing to the surface publicly a lot of things that under normal circumstances would stay in-house.
Yeah, and Glenn...
So that's exposing culture problems.
That's exactly right. And Glenn Bartlett has been on the record, certainly was written about in the Herald Sun, I think last year, that he wanted hair testing for all senior leaders at the club. And it was denied. It was rejected.
Why was it denied?
I don't know the exact reasons. It was rejected. And this is not to say that would have meant that Joel Smith didn't allegedly do what he did. It sort of speaks to the culture that he's spoken about in the past. The Clayton Oliver circus is a complete circus, and people at the club would argue that they've done all they can to help Clayton Oliver, but nevertheless, it's still part of a broader picture. The clear error in bringing Brodie Grundy into the club is a football decision, but it speaks again to mismanagement to a degree. Back-to-back straight sets exits for the first time in the top 8 era. It means they haven't been successful when they're in the window. The Joel Smith scenario and the continued question marks around Simon Goodwin as well. That's really interesting. They're question marks. They're no more than that, but they're certainly question marks.
I think they're more than just question marks.
But we don't know the exact facts.
No, exactly. But they're more than just question marks.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's, I know Kane Corns is big on this, and I'll let Kane fire his own battles. Yeah. But there's a lot of people that are putting 2 and 2 together.
Yep.
On this one.
Yeah, well, Simon Goodwin is a premiership coach, and the club backed him when Glenn Bartlett was making allegations against the coach early this year. The club didn't just back him; they came out and they re-signed him. They extended him for 2 years. He was contracted to the end of 2024. He's now contracted to the end of 2026. So Gary Pert and the senior leaders, Alan Richardson is a fundamentally decent person and a good leader. I've worked with him when I worked at St Kilda. He's a good person.
Absolutely is.
Simon Goodwin is a premiership coach, and people say he's a fantastic person. I don't know him that well, but something is amiss.
Yeah.
And I would imagine we're trying to pigeonhole what that is, but I would imagine even internally they would be trying to pigeonhole it as well. How did we let the Clayton Oliver thing get to how it did? How's Joel Smith been allowed to do this? Why did we get Brodie Grundy in when it was never going to work? They're all different degrees, but there's been a number of problems over a couple of years now which need to be rectified, and the Joel Smith saga is just the latest of it.
Yeah, there's been other clubs that have been privately under the pump over the past, let's say, 15 years with this sort of culture problem. Sometimes they can keep it in-house, other times they can't. And generally speaking, it's clubs that underperform that get put under the microscope when things get out of hand. Now, the Western Bulldogs have had their own challenges post winning the grand final. It's kind of like, well, you've won the grand final, you should be winning more of them, and then we start to hear all stories about what's happening internally. Hawthorn had its challenges with a really talented young list going way back where they had their own problems as well that they had to sort through, but they were generally able to keep a lot of that behind closed doors. Some of it got out, but some of it stayed internally. And Melbourne seems to be the next club. And I think what tends to happen is that when you've got a club that wins a premiership in such devastating fashion back in 2021, and then going into 22, 23, the expectation is they're only going to get better. They're a pretty young list. This is set up. They're going to be the next Richmond. They're going to be the next Geelong. And they don't meet that expectation. You start to look inside the football club and think, what's wrong? Yeah. What's going on? What is it? And unfortunately, Melbourne's giving talkback radio stations, social media, media in general, giving too many easy examples of why it's going wrong.
Yeah. Melbourne's embraced a culture of individuality. Max Gawn's the captain. He's an individual. Yeah, I say that in a way that is complimentary.
Absolutely.
He allows everyone to be who they are, and that is a good thing. He's a fantastic leader. But the unfortunate thing is that some people have taken that too far at the football club. They are too much of an individual in a team environment. And Clayton Oliver's a great example of that. This is where emotional health and wellness intersects with other issues in society. And Clayton Oliver is clearly a product of that. And Joel Smith might be as well, I'm not sure. But whatever is missing has been bubbling away for a couple of years. Glenn Bartlett has spoken about it a couple of times in court documents. He hasn't done an interview. He's released a couple of statements. He's spoken in court. He's released documents. So has his partner, Victoria. And people at Melbourne poo-poo Glenn Bartlett. And I'm not here to justify what he's saying or otherwise, but what I do know is that saga is still rolling on, and that should have ended by now, Whitey.
So, Tom, I'll ask you, let's go back to the Stephen May situation. We are going to get to your calls. We're stacking them up. We're going to do them after the break, just so we can go straight into as many as we can in a
Stephen May, Jake
period of time. So, no. I'm going to about the Stephen May at the best and fairest.
Oh.
Now, we love players speaking their mind. Now, in the case at a best and fairest, sometimes it's after they've had a few drinks or they're being encouraged by their fans while they're up on stage. But in a lot of ways, and I said this at the time with Adam Cooney a couple of weeks ago, that it's emblematic of Melbourne in Stephen coming out and saying, "Oh, we were the best team in it," and I'm really angry that Collingwood wins it because we were better than Collingwood. But the reality is Melbourne haven't been the best team in it for the last couple of years. I reckon they've probably got the best list, but they haven't been the best team. They've underperformed. They've had their issue, and I'm just talking about on the field here. But they've had a lot of issues on the field that they haven't been able to fix. But they seem to have this attitude that we are still the best team. So that's where I see culture problems. Just from what's being said.
Entitled, arrogant?
Those sorts of things. Oh, we're better than that. Oh, we're better than Collingwood. No, you're not better than Collingwood because you didn't beat Collingwood. And I don't care about inside 50s and this and that. You didn't beat them when
it mattered.
And you didn't then win the next week.
Yeah.
Against a team that had come from the clouds just to make the finals. And last year, you didn't beat Brisbane at the MCG when Brisbane can't beat anyone at the MCG. So there's something not right there.
Yep. It's hard to argue with any of that. The Steve May one is a balance for me because I love when players
so do I, but I felt that it was emblematic of where they're at, where, hey, you know what? You're actually not as good as you think you are. Because if you were as good as you think you are, you're not going out in straight sets in a final series.
No, that's right. And they should have done better the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Especially last year when they had Brisbane at the MCG and they didn't get it done. This year they lost 2 tight games. Collingwood they should have won, but they lost.
No, they shouldn't have won. They didn't win because they weren't good enough to win.
No, well they should have won because they had more opportunities.
That doesn't matter. You got to take those opportunities, and they were missing opportunities all year.
Yeah, they were.
And when it came up to that final, they hadn't put in the work to fix that. So then on a big stage, get it right, and they didn't.
Yeah.
So I don't think they did deserve to win.
No, I'm not saying they deserve to win. I'm saying that they played good enough football that they should have won if they were good enough, but they weren't good enough.
Yeah.
They in the forward half, they weren't good enough, clearly. So we can talk about that game all day if you want.
But it's that whole thing around should have.
Yeah, should have. And in the end, Steve May's above 30. Max Gawn is 30 plus. Even Christian Petrarca is now 28, I think. So the window only lasts so long. And their list management's been pretty good, but they haven't been able to get in that forward, that connecting play that they needed. Adam Uze's a big loss, Whitey. Adam Uze was the match day coach. He sat up there, he pulled the strings. I'm not going to say he was the mastermind behind a premiership, but he was a really important role player in Simon Goodwin's coaching team. More influential than any other assistant coach in the AFL, Adam Uze, and he's gone.
What else is going on?
Well, Hawthorn's delisted 3 players, Lachlan Bramble, Fergus Green and Ned Long.
Oh, Fergus Green.
Yeah, Fergus Green, a little bit of a surprise, Whitey. What do you think? You're the Hawks man.
I thought he sort of came from nowhere to get an opportunity. I thought they might have stayed with him for another year, but I guess with the players coming in, it might make it harder for him to get a game.
So Dylan Shields undergone foot surgery in a bid to overcome the problem that curtailed him through this year. This is a story from Cal Toomey on the AFL website. So he wasn't traded yesterday, Dylan Shield, clearly, but there were some discussions about him potentially getting to St Kilda, and there are some concerns over his physical ailments and I guess his durability. But he did have knee surgery early this month as well. So this is foot surgery.
Wasn't it after an incident at home where he was playing with his
I saw that.
child and he fell over or something in the backyard? Fell over a toy or something?
It can happen easily, I reckon, especially with your boys, given how much they love their sport. Now, this foot injury will see him on crutches for a couple of weeks. And there's still a plan that's yet to be determined as to when he can rejoin pre-season, but he will have a restricted start. They're a better club with Dylan Shield at his best, and my understanding was that his preference was to get to St Kilda.
It was, yeah.
But the Saints weren't willing to give up enough for him, and Essendon, as a result, weren't willing to entertain it.
Did they sort of hesitate a little bit, St Kilda, with the latest injuries and thinking, it might be too much of a flight risk considering?
I think they just placed the draft on a very high pedestal and they weren't going to give up a good pick, a second or first rounder, for a player who is clearly towards the end, further towards the end than the start. He can still be very valuable, but he hasn't been overly durable. Do we have time for one more little story,
Waddy? We do.
So I want to go deep in this Port Adelaide Essendon trade, which sent Xavier Dersma to Essendon and Brandon Zerk-Thatcher to Port Adelaide. So initially, Essendon was saying it should be player for player. Dersma for Zerk-Thatcher. I think we all agree that Dersma is probably worth more than Zerk-Thatcher as a contracted player and his upside. Not by a lot, but I still think that clearly Port had to give up something. Now, Essendon had to give up something to get Dersma in. Essendon were asked to give a future second rounder, and they scoffed at that. They're not going to give up Zerk-Thatcher and a second rounder. So Port said, well, what else have you got? The issue that Essendon had was they didn't have a future third rounder. They'd already given that away. So then they just couldn't come to an agreement. And I'm told that Craig Vozzo, the Essendon CEO, and Chris Davies stepped in, the Port Adelaide footy boss, and said, let us do this. So clearly Adrian Dodoro is still involved and Jason Cripps.
And Cripper and Adrian get on very well.
They had lunch a couple of days before, but a CEO intervention. Craig Vozzo got involved. Chris Davies, the Port Adelaide footy boss, got involved. And it became really quite tense there for a while, to the point where half an hour before the trade was completed, it looked like it wasn't going to get done. In the end, Port just said, give us whatever else you've got. So they got 3 fourth-round picks, I think one of them this year, 2 of them next year, and that got the deal done. That deal was only agreed to at about 7:23 p.m. And then the email was sent, as Xavier Dersma said, at 7:29. So it was so delicate, right up to the very end.
Port Adelaide might not even use those picks.
No, they won't use the picks, which you just led me beautifully into the next story. So Port aren't going to use those picks. They're going to probably take one player at the draft and probably upgrade a couple of young players. So Quinton Narkle might be one of them. Jed McEntee could be another. And it also looks as if Sam Hayes and Scott Lysett will be delisted and he'll have a choice to wherever else he wants to go. And Sam Hayes probably won't be at Port next year either. So it's likely they'll just take one player in the draft. And that's amazing. That's pick 73.
There is a statement coming through regarding Elijah Hollands, and it's not dissimilar to what we were talking about earlier in the show, Tom.
I'm just going to read the Carlton statement. It's also important to understand that Gold Coast has released a statement as well. So the Carlton Football Club is aware that Elijah Hollands, who they brought in yesterday in a trade, has been served with a notice to appear in court relating to possession of an illicit substance. Now, the club was notified last month by Hollands, who was a Gold Coast player at the time, given its existing interest in bringing him to the football club. An informed decision was then made to proceed with the recruitment, and the club will now provide the necessary support to Hollands. So in other words, they knew about it before they traded him in. He will commence pre-season training upon its scheduled resumption in November. As the matter is currently before the courts, the club will make no further comment this time. I've got nothing more to add to that other than the fact that Carlton knew, and it was a bit of buyer beware, and now it's before the courts.
I don't want to say any more about it.
No, we've spoken about it. Go back and listen to the podcast if you want to have a proper listen.
All right.
I've got something, Whitey, or did you want to have your strong opinion?
Are you talking about your ladder?
Yeah.
No, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So, cricket question. You and I love our cricket. Peter Handscomb has got the best pair of hands in Australian cricket history. True or false?
Oh, history. Well, I'm only 32, but he has the best pair of hands since Ricky Ponting.
I think he's better than Ricky Ponting.
Really?
I can't think of anybody that catches the ball as well as he does.
Hard to argue.
He's just brilliant, Peter Handscomb. Anyway, just sorry, that was just
that's okay.
I know you like your cricket. Now you've got a ladder that you'd like to go through.
This is the trade and free agency ladder. I've ranked teams from 1 to 18 based on how successful I believe their off season has been.
Okay.
So I'll go from 18 to 1, if that's okay. Yep. I think the team that has performed the worst in this off season so far is Richmond. I don't think they've done enough. Yes, they got a future second rounder for Ivan Soldo, but I think for a team that should be regenerating on the run, they should have done more.
Yeah, they couldn't have done more though because they didn't have any picks. They gave them all up to get Hopper and
should have traded some out. I think they need to do a little bit of a rebuild. Geelong 17. Now they will argue that they didn't want to do any more. That's okay, but they've got pick 8, and they don't have any picks till much later, and they didn't bring anyone in. So I think the Cats have been the second worst. They've also lost to Sava Radigalea.
Yeah, we've got Scott Lucas coming up. You're going to have to go a bit faster through this.
Sorry, they also have picked 25. So they've got two in the top 25. Freo. I think Freo is probably lucky not to be lower here. They've lost players. They went after Tyler Brockman. They missed out. I don't think the Dockers have had a good off-season. And that might not be all the list management's fault, but it hasn't worked out. West Coast so far, 15. West Coast can still improve a lot if they trade some draft picks, but I think if they went to the draft as a rebuilding club with pick 1 and pick 23, that would be doing a disservice to their rebuild. GWS, 14, almost completely inactive. They went after Elliot Himmelberg, offered a late pick, didn't get him.
What happened to Orazio Fantasia?
Well, he's probably going to sign as a rookie. So that's neither here nor there. I think the Giants are very settled. They don't need a good off-season, but nevertheless, I've got them at 14. St Kilda, 13. This might raise a few eyebrows. Liam Henry, they bought in. I think they should have done more if they're going to rebuild the list. Brisbane and Collingwood, I've got 12 and 11. They've both been reasonable, but not great. I think Collingwood with Lockie Schultz is a good pickup, but losing Taylor Adams, I think, is actually a bit of a loss for them. Not as much Jack Ginnivan. Adelaide didn't get Tom Petty. They didn't get Marby Ochol. They would have liked to do more, I think, the Crows. And their draft hand is reasonable.
They were active, but it didn't result in anything.
That's right. So they tried. It just didn't work out. North Melbourne, I've got 9. The AFL gave them a lot of picks. I think they can do a lot more. They can be in the top 8 of this list by draft night for sure. Carlton, 8. Elijah Holland, barring what we've said before, I think as a footballer is the right sort of guy you want to get in, a top 10 pick. Melbourne, I've got 7.
Carlton's very high.
Yeah, maybe a little bit high. The Western Bulldogs, I've got 6. I like what the Western Bulldogs have done getting up to pick 4. That's the key for them. Hawthorn, I've got 5. They did 6 deals on the last day. They were probably 12 before the last day, Whitey. Port Adelaide, they got 2 ruckmen and 2 defenders. Bang, bang.
They got what they wanted.
Very, very good. Yep, and they've got a late pick. That doesn't matter. They've got what they wanted. They're in the window. Gold Coast did exactly what they wanted. They turned pick 4 into an array of later picks so they can get their 4 academy kids in. Well done to the Gold Coast.
If those academy kids, if they were just in the draft, how many of those would have gone in the top 20?
According to draft expert Cal Toomey, at least 2, maybe 3. And there's 4 of them I think will be top 4.
Part of the reason why Damien Harwick wanted to go there.
Absolutely, yes. Essendon, I've got as 2, just 2. I think they had a really good off-season with Jade Gresham coming in and Xavier Dersma. But the big one is Ben Mackay. They beat the Swans and the Hawks with Ben Mackay. That's a big get. And the Swans I've got as number 1. Taylor Adams, Brodie Grundy, Joel Hamling, and there's one other there as well that they've done really well to get. And I really rate how they've gone about their work. James Jordan's the other one. So the Swans are the best for me. Essendon next best, then probably Daylight. That's my ladder, Whitey. What are your thoughts?
I'd have Carlton lower. I'd have Melbourne lower.
Yep.
I think Melbourne had to get a key forward. They had to do whatever it takes to get a key forward.
Fair.
Or get aggressive to go for pick 1. I think
they could still do that though.
Yeah, but I reckon they needed another pick.
6 and 11 they've got at the moment, yes.
Not enough. They need another one. Essendon's a hard one because the Bombers, they've gone and brought in 4 players and they haven't given up their first pick. But I think all the players are B players, maybe some of them B+. They didn't bring in top-end talent.
Which top-end talent was available, though?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But you don't just – it's like if you've got a voucher to spend at a shopping centre, you don't just go and spend it because you've got it. You spend it when you've got something that you really want.
Yes.
I feel they had that voucher because they had all this money and they just went and spent it on whatever they could find as opposed to wait until they got
I feel like you've done that before as well, Whitey.
Regularly. Regularly. That's just my view on
No,
Essendon.
fair enough. Fair.